There are few film franchises that are as exciting or as hard to predict as George Miller's Mad Max movies. From the ragtag Australian original from 1979 through the belated franchise reinvigoration of Fury Road in 2015, each offers a very different take on the simple story of road warrior Max Rockatansky's fight to survive and save others in the post-apocalyptic wasteland. But none of these films are as franchise redefining or as complicated as Furiosa, a Mad Max Saga from 2024. If you've been following my channel for a little while, then you probably already know that I'm a big Mad Max fan, as I've done videos on every film so far in this franchise. But this wasn't a series that I was into as a little kid. Actually, it was Fury Road that got me into Mad Max, and afterward I sought out the franchise. And at the time of this video's publication, it's been almost exactly 1 year since Furiosa was released in theaters, and became, unfortunately, a box office disappointment. And in the time since, I feel as if Furiosa has quickly been forgotten. More of a strange misfire with a cult following than the epic continuation of a beloved franchise. But why? Let's return to the world of Mad Max to better understand how this epic prequel film works to redefine George Miller's wasteland, what caused it to severely underperform in theaters, and what we can take away from Furiosa, George Miller's epic of revenge and redemption. If you're a Mad Max fan, then you probably don't need much explaining about the backstory of these movies or the history of the franchise. But what's most important to understand here is the work that Miller did surrounding Fury Road and what he would do between Fury Road and Furiosa. Miller spent several decades slowly piecing together his story for Fury Road, which went through many different iterations and ideas over the years. And as the film got closer to production, Miller wound up not just making the backstory for his titular character, but writing out the script for the film that would become Furiosa in full, with the final scene between Dementis and Furiosa used in casting auditions to test for actors' chemistry, instead of anything from Fury Road itself, as well as a novella surrounding Max called The Wasteland. I'd say about 80% of it was there in that first version, because we were going to do it as an extended anime movie, said Miller. But it certainly changed, as it should, once we actually brought the cast in and started to design the movie. We already had Gastown, the Bullet Farm, we had early illustrations and early concept art in that screenplay. We had a really good basis to work from, but everything evolved as we needed sequences to happen in a real space. So there's a lot of changes that went down around this prequel film. Initially, Miller had intended to shoot Fury Road and Furiosa back to back, with Miller and co-writer Nico Latharis writing the script in full before Fury Road began shooting. Then, when it was decided they couldn't do 2 live-action films so quickly, the script was given to Mahiro Maeda, who had previously worked on everything from Kill Bill to Neon Genesis Evangelion, with the intention for Maeda to direct an anime spin-off initially titled The Peach. That's a significant piece of Furiosa's story that we'll get back to in a few minutes. However, delays in filming Fury Road led to the anime being cancelled, and post-Fury Road lawsuits by Miller against Warner Bros. Over unpaid salaries delayed Furiosa. So what you have in the finalized Furiosa is a film that went through many different iterations, with its story changing from unseen background for actors, to anime script, to live-action iteration over the span of more than a decade. That means that while Furiosa still links together with Fury Road, its intentions and ideas evolved a lot from when that film was first shot. It also means that Miller continued to evolve as a filmmaker. In 2022, Miller released 3,000 Years of Longing, a story of a genie released by a woman in the modern day who tells her his story of love and loss. And I don't see anybody ever talk about this movie, but man, it is so freaking good. And I feel as though this story, parsed into 5 distinct sections as standalone but connected stories, weaving a larger tapestry of a world across millennia, actually has just as much in common with Furiosa as any Mad Max movie. Miller is obsessed with the nature of storytelling and its importance to the nature of community, history, and perseverance as people. That's also a crucial part of the Mad Max films and has evolved alongside the franchise, with Miller saying, "There has been constant change in the history of the movies, and this change is now becoming more and more rapid. But the one thing that I believe is consistent is that we need stories. The more complex the world is, and the more noise there is out there, the more we need stories. It's not something that someone is prescribing, it's just there. We're hardwired for storytelling. It's a way we will make the world coherent. Furiosa, as a film, is more textually a story being told to the viewer than any Mad Max film before, even with The Road Warrior being bookended as a tale told by the feral child decades later. And the style of Furiosa is more like the Odyssey or Beowulf than a Mad Max movie, which are iterative and tell a very similar story cycle across most of the sequels. Eventually, with Miller's lawsuit against WB settled in 2020, Furiosa was cleared to move forward, beginning principal photography in 2022, with the cast including Anya Taylor-Joy as Furiosa, Elila Brown as Child and Teen Furiosa, with CGI slowly morphing the actress to resemble Taylor-Joy more and more over time, Chris Hemsworth as Dementis, Tom Burke as Praetorian Jack, who replaced Yahya Abdul-Mateen II due to scheduling conflicts, and a mix of new and returning cast to fill out the world. So all that is what led to this film being made. Let's talk about the film itself. Spoilers ahead. Furiosa spans 15 years, beginning with young Furiosa being kidnapped from the Green Place by the followers of biker horde leader Dementis, and her mother's attempt to rescue her leading to her death, with Furiosa living under Dementis as his pseudo-daughter. Eventually, Dementis' attempt to rule the wasteland puts him into conflict with Immortan Joe, ruler of the water stronghold Citadel, with Furiosa traded to Joe as one of his wives as Dementis becomes the ruler of Gastown. But Furiosa's escape and disguise as a war boy and eventually an Imperator leads to her quest for revenge against Dementis in the midst of a massive war, overcoming her desire to escape back home. Thematically, Furiosa is in line with all of the Max sequels, with its story about sparking change and finding hope in a world that seems hopeless. The only difference here is that all of that hope and change is completely internal, all located within Furiosa herself, with really no hope of actually changing the world around her. It's impossible for that to happen here because that can only occur within Fury Road. And piece by piece, Furiosa loses everything. Her home, her mother, her freedom, her identity, her kindred spirit, her arm, leaving her only with revenge and a peach pit from the Green Place. It's a tragic story painted across a sweeping landscape and a huge scope, going back and forth between rival clans and punctuated by huge action set pieces, with a nearly silent protagonist at the center. Miller, of course, loves a silent protagonist, and has often said his ambition with the Mad Max movies is for them to make sense without words. And with Furiosa willingly mute to prevent the secrets of the Green Place from being found, and then to disguise her identity as a woman, we're constantly following a character who is mostly known through actions and reactions instead of through words. Structurally, Furiosa is broken into 5 chapters. The Pole of Inaccessibility, that's the most difficult place on a continent to reach from the shoreline, Lessons from the Wasteland, The Stowaway, Homeward, and Beyond Vengeance. Now, breaking your film into 5 pieces and denying the typical 3-act structure is a quick way to both make a much more narratively complex film and annoy your audience. But I think it says a lot about what Miller is trying to do here. This is an epic that's more in line with a novel than a blockbuster film. And like a novel, it doesn't feel beholden to give us everything we're expecting from the narrative. We essentially spend the first half of the film with Furiosa as a child, and either her mother or Dementis as the actual lead of the movie. Joe and Dementis' forces battle in the 40-day Wasteland War happens entirely off-screen during a montage, and Furiosa's one true quest, to escape and return home to the Green Place, is never fulfilled and is instead sidelined by her path of revenge, with Fury Road already telling us that she will never actually get back home because it's swallowed up by the desert at some point during this movie. Even the movie's one true act of catharsis, Furiosa finally catching and killing Dementis, doesn't truly feel satisfying because, after everything he's done, Dementis is finally revealed as a vulnerable, broken man right at the very end. There's something pitiful and sad about Dementis having a seizure from the beating given to him by Furiosa, finally realizing who she is and egging her on at the end of all things.
The question is, do you have it in you to make it epic?
What's probably most impressive about Furiosa is that despite all the massive sequences and changes in direction and time period, the film constantly keeps Furiosa's growth in focus, and completely understandable despite the character speaking so little. And the most incredible set piece happens right in the middle of the film, as Praetorian Jack and his warrig convoy fight off the flying forces of the Octoboss, and are helped by the stowaway Furiosa, who was on board to escape the Citadel. It's essentially Fury Road or the Road Warrior's climax plunked here at the center to push Furiosa's character in a new direction. According to Miller, the entire sequence took 78 days to shoot and was mostly shot by stunt coordinator Guy Norris on the Hay Plains following intricate planning by Miller. It's really wild, and like Fury Road, it's a total blend of real stunt work and physical vehicles with CGI for environments and compositing to eliminate risks for stunt performers. But like the rest of Furiosa, I think the CGI is just a little too obvious and dips in quality during some shots. There's moments like this throughout the film and it just breaks the immersion a little. Probably the result of the film's ambitions outpacing its capabilities at times, and it kinda makes me wish Miller would go back to the practicality of Beyond Thunderdome, which, for all its weaknesses, looks amazing and feels grand. I really enjoy all of the characters here. Like every Mad Max movie, Furiosa is chock full of small side characters that are also unique and strange, making a lasting impression in just minutes. But this is really Furiosa and Dementis' story. Everyone else is in service to that. And I don't think it's a surprise, but Anya Taylor-Joy is incredible as Furiosa, and Elila Brown is really good as her young version. Taylor-Joy is one of the best actresses working today, and her expressiveness and physicality is really key to making this character work. The deaths, betrayals, and losses here mean something to us because they mean something to her. Clearly, the Furiosa shoot was not an easy experience for Taylor-Joy. And while it wasn't a nightmare set like Fury Road, the long shooting schedule, intensity of the environment, and isolation of the character was rough, with the actress later saying, "I've never been more alone than making that movie. I don't want to go too deep into it, but everything I thought was going to be easy was hard." Next question, sorry. Talk to me in 20 years. And among all the strange and terrifying villains of the series, Chris Hemsworth as Dementis is easily the best. He's odd, he's charismatic, he's equally funny and scary, and best of all, he's given the time and range to be incredibly complex. Miller chooses to have a lot of things happen with Dementis off-screen as time passes and we follow Furiosa's journey. Power changes hands, alliances fall through, and Dementis becomes more and more deranged. But we often only see this in the aftermath and without it being said. And most fascinating of all, it shows Dementis to be a terrible leader, unable to manage Gastown and falling apart as a man mentally and emotionally broken by the fall of the world, who has only gotten by because of his charisma and constant reinvention. First, he's an all-white messiah figure who shows mercy to Furiosa. Then he's the red Dementis who wages war. Then he's the cruel, dark Dementis. None of these are real. They're personas to handle the pain and madness of the wasteland. In the world of Mad Max, most people either embrace their cruelty and power to rule with hate, like the Lord Humongous or Immortan Joe, or simply cannot overcome their brokenness and isolate themselves from the world like Max. Dementis and Furiosa are different. They're constantly changing in the course of this story, propelled by something else to survive: pain and revenge. One element I find fascinating is that author Kyle Buchanan, who wrote the tell-all behind-the-scenes book on Fury Road, Blood, Sweat, and Chrome, revealed that the original script read by Charlize Theron as Fury Road Prep had Furiosa turned into one of Immortan Joe's brides and raped by him until she's thrown out for being infertile, eventually working her way up to being an imperator without Joe knowing. In the finalized film, young Furiosa escapes before that can happen and works her way up. Obviously, Miller is excising a really brutal and tragic element of the story, and I totally get that he's got a different outlook on what he would or would not want to show in his films today versus decades ago. But it also means that Furiosa's arc and her revenge against Immortan Joe doesn't make quite as much sense. Her final line to Joe in Fury Road, "Remember me?" now really doesn't make sense. But I think it's a small price to pay for Miller wanting to remove something he felt was just not right for his story anymore. Furiosa suffers so much already that her arc works totally fine without that in there. So much of Furiosa plays like an epic poem, with everything grander and stranger than reality. And it's Furiosa's final revenge that really drives this idea home, with the history man, who is essentially telling the story to us, saying that no one knows for sure how Furiosa enacted her revenge on Dementis, until we finally see an old, withered, and still alive Dementis stashed high in Furiosa's hiding place, with a peach tree growing out of his stomach, using this figure of brutal cruelty and hate to finally grow a symbol of new hope and life from the pit she's carried for years.
Each of us in our own way will vanish from this earth. And then, perhaps, some uncorrupted life will rise to adorn it.
Now, you couldn't really keep a person alive and grow a fruit tree out of them. I tested this for myself to make sure for the video, and nope, I couldn't get the same results to happen. Hey, quiet over there. But what's really important is for this whole exaggerated myth-making to be at the center of what Furiosa is trying to say. And of course, since the story of Furiosa is really given its true conclusion in another movie, it sort of makes this prequel not totally satisfying or structurally sound. It's clear that either Miller or the studio or both felt the need to explicitly show the conclusion by giving us a Cliff's Notes and Furiosa's end credits. But really, that just makes me want to rewatch Fury Road, a movie that entirely works on its own without Furiosa, while Furiosa needs Fury Road to feel complete, both at its end and in the larger context. You know, this movie has so many different elements and things that it's trying to say that I find it pretty hard to weave them all together into a coherent script when I'm trying to dig down into what Miller is making here with his movie. So instead, here is just a list of interesting things I wanted to touch on. Chris Hemsworth's wife, actress Elsa Pataky, plays two parts in the film: the sharpshooting Vuvolini general and the disfigured Dementis loyalist, Mr. Norton. Miller loves recasting actors for multiple roles throughout the series, so why not give the same actor multiple roles in the same movie? Dementis has his nipple piercings ripped out in an extremely odd but funny in a disturbing way standoff. I don't know what to make of that, but it leaves an impression. Actor Tom Burke as Praetorian Jack could absolutely be Solid Snake. Not only did MGS creator Hideo Kojima say so, but everyone on set called him Snake. What an honor. The Octoboss. That is all. Max, of course, makes a cameo watching Furiosa collapse in the desert, and while it isn't said, I feel he was the one to drag her back to the Citadel in a small act of kindness. Chumbucket, a major character and ally to Max in the video game, makes a cameo, illustrating how much the game pulled from Miller's notes without his direct involvement. Pissboy is a fascinating position in the War Boys, but I feel like it wouldn't get a lot of respect. Dementis' arrival at the Citadel and the ensuing attack by the War Boys is an incredible piece of world building and tension that I think is overlooked when touching on the best moments here. This movie is 2 hours and 28 minutes, and I think it needed to be 15 minutes shorter. Honestly, I'm in favor of movies being any length that is right for the story, but this just needed to be a little bit tighter. We're getting into Triple H WrestleMania match levels of wrap it up before the end. For me, Furiosa is a movie I appreciate more for its technical mastery, the sheer talent of everyone involved both in front of and behind the camera, and the ambitions and goals of its story, but not a film I totally connect with emotionally. Still, it's the type of ambition and invention that's completely different from most big-budget action films these days, and that should have been rewarded for its originality. Instead, what we got was a financial disaster. As I've mentioned, a lot of the discussion around Furiosa was about how it really did not do well financially, with the film making a total $211 million from its box office and from streaming revenue, with only $67 million of that coming from the United States. Pair that with the film's $168 million production budget, extra budget for marketing, and other expenses, and considering that movie theaters take home about half of the box office, and according to a recent report from Deadline, Furiosa easily lost $119 million. So why did Furiosa perform so poorly? Well, for larger context, the first half of 2024 saw a ton of films do pretty bad at the box office. Some made more money than Furiosa, some made less. Some stunk, a couple were great. The second half of 2024 was much stronger financially than the first half, and while I can't guarantee that Furiosa would have done better if it was released later in the year, it was definitely out in the midst of a slump for moviegoers. The second part of this equation, and what I think is the most important part, is that this is a really difficult to market movie. What everyone seems to forget is that Fury Road was a decent-sized hit, but not an enormous one, making $380 million against a $180 million budget. That's enough to be profitable, but Fury Road's viewership grew a lot in the years that followed. So what you have here is a prequel to a decent-sized hit starring that legacy sequel's side character coming out 9 years after the last movie and having a radically different take on the material. To me, it felt like the massive wave of Fury Road love and conversation happened within the first 5 years following the film and sorta cooled off afterward. If Miller had made The Wasteland 5 years after Fury Road and starring Tom Hardy, I think it would have done better because it would have cashed in on people's awareness and still real excitement. That's not to say that The Wasteland would have been better than Furiosa, and clearly Furiosa is what Miller wanted to make first, but it would have been much easier to market. Really, the main audience for Furiosa was Fury Road obsessives, and that's who they sold the film to. Not the broader audience looking for something cool and new to watch on a Friday night. Will Furiosa gain a greater appreciation in the coming years? That's tough to say, but I don't think it will have the same type of esteem as Fury Road, partially because not nearly as many people have seen it, and also because it's simply not as world-shaking as that film once was. As for the future of the franchise, Miller has said a lot of things about making another Max film, which would end up being what's currently referred to as Mad Max The Wasteland. According to the director, The Wasteland was written as a novella for further background work while making Fury Road, and would follow Max before the events of the film, likely fitting alongside Furiosa and filling more into the gap of time between the end of this movie and the beginning of Fury Road. What that would exactly look like has been kept vague, but the fact that a lot of this material seems to have been pulled from to make the Fury Road comics and the Mad Max video game, which I think is really fun and Miller did not like, can kinda show us what would happen there, even if it plays out very differently. In particular, the fact that Scabrous Scrotus is alive by the end of Furiosa, but gone by the beginning of Fury Road, indicates that Max and Scrotus's war as seen in the game, and Max's tragic connection to Hope and her daughter Glory, would probably be at the center of that film, as Max is completely broken down physically and mentally through his failures. Will The Wasteland ever get made? Miller has said at various points in the decade since Fury Road that he's ready to make The Wasteland, that he's not interested in making The Wasteland, that it was never his plan to make The Wasteland, that it all just depends on Warner Brothers' interest post-Furiosa, and that yes, it will be made. Obviously, the poor performance of Furiosa is no incentive to make another right now. But the now 80-year-old director has also said that the film's positive reception from audiences and critics was more important than its profits. As for now, I personally doubt it will ever get made, but I desperately want to see it. I feel like The Wasteland would be a fitting final piece of this new Mad Max trilogy, and also strengthen Furiosa's place as a piece of it too. Until then, we'll just have to keep wandering this wasteland, in search of our better selves. Thanks for watching today's video, and I'm finally wrapping up my coverage of all of the current Mad Max movies. If you've been following me on the channel for a while, you'll know that I've done separate videos on every single Mad Max film, ranging from the original from 1979 all the way now through Furiosa, although I didn't necessarily publish them in that order. The original Mad Max movie that I did was The Road Warrior back nearly at the beginning of making this channel, and I do have some thoughts on wanting to go back and make a new Road Warrior video, because I've definitely grown a lot in my skills since making that so many years ago. Last year when Furiosa came out, I did a short video on it, one of those vertical ones that was only a minute, but there's so much more going on with this movie that I wanted to touch back on it at some point. And with it now being almost a year since it came out in theaters, I thought that now was the perfect time to do it. In the years since, Furiosa's reputation hasn't really gone anywhere, and I feel like that's because it really didn't do well at the theaters, with more people wanting to actually talk about its box office performance than itself as a movie. And obviously I wanted to talk about that in this video because it is an important part of its legacy, as I'm worried we're not going to get any more Mad Max movies for a very long time. But there's a lot more going on with this movie than just how much money it made. I really think it's a fascinating movie and it's really well done, But it's a really odd film and is really oddly shaped in what it's trying to do and how it's structured. That does make it more memorable, but it also sometimes doesn't fully work as a film. Still, I'm all in favor of movies getting big budgets and taking big swings, instead of always just playing it safe and being unmemorable. And really, of all the things that you could call Furiosa, unmemorable is definitely not one of them. I really hope that we will get The Wasteland someday, because Furiosa sometimes feels as if it's an incomplete part of the Max history overall. I'd love to hear your thoughts on Furiosa and the Mad Max movies overall, and where you would rank Furiosa within the larger Mad Max canon. I'd love to do a ranking of all these films someday, as well as maybe a video on the Mad Max video game from a decade ago, because I think it's really fun and has a lot of interesting things going on with it as well. As always, a huge thank you to my patrons and members for their continued support. And if you'd like to be a patron or member, it's only $2 a month for early access to every video, and exclusive Patreon and member-only reviews, with this month's exclusive video being on Judge Dredd: The Apocalypse War, which I think is a perfect accompaniment to Furiosa. So until next time, I hope that you're taking care of yourselves and ruling the wasteland.